Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, the last episode of Pod Save Chocolate for 2026. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to do a follow-up episode from my previous one last Friday. My previous one last Friday was 2025, a look at the year just passed, and today's episode is going to be about 2026, the year ahead. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. I'm logged in, so mine says account. You can click on the join button. And if you click on the join button, which is in the upper right-hand corner, you can sign up for a free membership, or there are memberships which support the Chocolate Life financially. And if you have the resources, this is the primary support for the Chocolate Life and Pod Save Chocolate. So I encourage you, for as little as $5 a month, you can become a supporter of the Chocolate Life and Pod Save Chocolate. A quick reminder to everybody that no matter where you are watching in terms of a platform, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, what you can do is you can go to the live chat in YouTube or the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook, and you can make a comment, ask a question, or just give me a quick shout out. Let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I'll get those up on the screen, up on stage, and I will respond to them saying thank you for connecting with me today, or answering your questions or responding to your comments, whatever it is that you'd like to say. And with that, let's get started on today's episode. For every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I create a post. And here is the post right here. Here's the post for today's episode. It's a run of show. None of these is scripted because I don't know who's going to respond in the middle of things and ruin my script, or not ruin, but derail my script. And so I do everything live, but this is a run of show. This will give you an idea about what it is that I plan to cover. And then if you want to, what you can do is you can click on, not click on, but if you have a separate device, you can scan the QR code, which is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen right now. And if you scan that QR code on your phone, it will open up this post on your phone. And you can listen to me or watch me on our computer and follow along on the phone. With respect to what it is that I'm going to be talking about. So you don't have to pay very, very close attention to what the URLs of individual pages are. You don't have to, if there is a link to something, the link will be here in the page and you'll be able to follow along. So that's an important thing to know. So this past Friday's episode was about looking back at 2025. And you can go there. Here's the post, and you can go through and you can listen to it. So here are the links to if you want to watch it on YouTube, or want to watch it on LinkedIn, or on Facebook for 30 days. After 30 days, it gets aged off. So YouTube and LinkedIn are the best platforms if you have accounts on both of those. And here are the stories that dominated 2025. So the price of cocoa, the EUDR, the breakup of Barry Callebaut, although I think it was less a dominant story for 2025, but it just exploded into our consciousness in the last week of, in the weeks of December. The ongoing saga of Alt chocolate, and then heavy metals and food safety in general sort of dominated the news stories in 2025. But let's go, and if you're interested, you can go and watch that episode after this one is over, or if you're not watching it live, you can watch it before coming to this episode, because they are in fact related to each other. So let's get started. So first, number one, the not trend stories. So these are important news stories that are going to dominate 2026, right? The first one is the price of cocoa. There is nothing that has happened this week or this month that is going to change the fact that the price of cocoa is going to dominate, right, when it comes to discussions about cocoa and chocolate in 2026. It looks like the futures market is settling in for the next 2 years. It looks like the futures market if things don't change too much. So there's no unexpected weather event. There's no predatory trading that is being done. There's and forecasts for production come true, right? It looks like the price of cocoa is going to settle in somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000 US dollars a metric ton. That's where the futures market is right now. And so that is what we can look forward to, I suppose, is the way you could describe it. That the price. So this is the price for bulk commodity cocoa. Specialty cocoa is going to be trading at a premium. Obviously, if there is a social certification or some other certification, it's going to be priced a little bit higher than that. Hopefully, what will happen as a result of that is that the farm gate price of cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana is not going to be uh, moved down. It was recently raised to something which is reasonable, not great, but better than it has ever been. But it has been suggested that if the price of cocoa goes down, that the farm gate price of cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana will also go down. And what that will do is it will signal to other countries and to major buyers to put price pressure, reducing the price of cocoa at the farm gate. We shall see how that works. We don't know yet, but the price of cocoa is going to be the dominant story in chocolate over the next year. And that has knock-on effects. One of the knock-on effects that's important to keep in mind is the story of the EUDR. So you'll see that, what I've done is I've sort of got, number one is the price of cocoa, 1A is the EUDR. So what does that mean? So the EUDR is designed originally to eliminate deforestation in cocoa and 6 other agricultural commodities around the world. And those regulations will have an impact on any commodity, any one of the regulated commodities, which find their ways into the EU. What has happened is that, number one, is that hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent if not billions of dollars, but hundreds of millions of dollars at the very least, have been spent by big companies and small companies on EUDR compliance regimes. So they need to make sure that their farmers that they buy from have their farm boundaries mapped via GBS. There is satellite surveillance services which are used to figure out what the land looked like before, and so they can compare, is it deforested now? There are all sorts of costs associated with this, and these costs are a part of why cocoa is as expensive as it is. It has been estimated that the cost of EUDR compliance is at least 100 US dollars per metric ton. Right? The EUDR, so that's raising the price of cocoa and raising the price of chocolate for everybody. There's also a lot of uncertainty associated with what the UDR final regulations are going to be. So it's been delayed again for 1 year. There are some changes to the regulations which are on the table, and we won't understand what the final regulations are, quote unquote, final regulations are, until sometime in April of 2026, because that's the deadline for these new updated regulations. But the EUDR is causing uncertainty in the marketplace. And that uncertainty in the marketplace does have an effect on pricing. At the moment, it looks like UDR compliance is priced in to the futures market. But any major change will, in fact, any major change in the UDR will, in fact, have an effect on the price of cocoa and the other commodities, agricultural commodities, which are regulated about it. Now, it's not in this post, but afterwards, what I will do is I will put a couple of links so that what you can do is you can go take a look at what the price of cocoa is. And this is something that I recommend, that if you're in the world of chocolate, you're in the world of confectionery, you have anything to do with cocoa, that you should be looking at the futures price of cocoa at least once a week. Monday morning as you start business, Friday afternoon as you close business down, but just put a little tickler into your calendar so that on a regular basis, what you're doing is you're looking at the price of cocoa. This is going to enable you to look ahead and understand how changes in the price of cocoa are going to affect your business. Changes in the EUDR regulations are going to affect the price of cocoa. And these are conditions which need to be monitored. It's one of the reasons why I talk about them once a month in my News and AMA episode. I always do, or I have been doing for well over a year now, a discussion of the price of cocoa and compliance issues, which are going to be a part of this. Fortunately, if you're a small chocolate maker, you probably will never be audited for EUDR compliance. And especially if you're from a low-risk country, you may never actually have to present documentation of your supply chain. However, if asked, you must be able to supply it. So there is going to be a cost to you, direct cost to you for EUDR compliance. You need to make sure that um, you can provide the documentation which is necessary if somebody which is upstream from you. So, for example, you might be importing cocoa from West Africa into the United States and then distributing a finished chocolate product into the EU. The person or the entity that's ultimately responsible for filing for the EDU is the first point of contact when it lands, not the customs broker, but the client, the customer, when it lands in the EU. Right? If they are ever audited, they may look to you to provide compliance, right? So you do need to have the documentation, even though you may not ever be subject to uh, any kind of penalties because you're not within the EUDO and the EUDR within the EU. And from a penalty perspective, EUDR reaches only to companies that are domiciled, headquartered in EU. But the EUDR and the ongoing saga of the EUDR is bringing uncertainty into the marketplace, and uncertainty contributes to volatility, right? The other thing that the price of cocoa, 1B, the other thing that the price of cocoa does is it is pushing interest, right, into alt cocoa and alt chocolate. So the move by big chocolate, and every one of the big chocolate companies has an investment or is doing their own R&D in producing an alternative to cocoa that they can then use into an alternative chocolate. Now, there are two basic technologies which are used in the production, of a cocoa alternative. They're precision fermentation, and then there is cell culturing. And there's, well, I suppose there's a third one, which we're going to call biosynthesis. And the reason why these companies are looking to replace cocoa is that cocoa is expensive, right? It's more expensive than there ever been. They're producing a commodity product which has, relatively thin margins at retail, and they want to be able to produce, continue to produce these products. So here in the United States, many, many years ago, so Hershey, it is rumored, stopped producing chocolate from cocoa beans in Pennsylvania. That's not true. And I have spread that notion, and it turns out not to be true. I looked it up for this episode. But what they did do is they took a number of their products, right, and they reformulated them, and they replaced a lot of the cocoa butter with an alternative cocoa butter, a cocoa butter equivalent or a cocoa butter replacement, and could no longer label them as chocolate. So they became chocolate flavored or chocolatey, right? So it wasn't a matter of stop manufacturing chocolate. It's just large parts of their chocolate line, their finished product line, could no longer be labeled as chocolate because of these reformulations. Only 15%. This was around 2012, 2013, 2014. Right? With the increase in the price of cocoa, big chocolate is now pushing real hard, right, on finding replacements for an expensive ingredient. And there are a couple of other reasons why they're doing this. In addition to cocoa being very expensive, it turns out that the uncertainty around EUDR compliance is pushing them to do this. So, for example, if they can use precision fermentation to produce a alternative cocoa, whatever it is, whatever form it takes, using ingredients that can be 100% sourced within the EU. So, for example, the largest producer of carob in the world is in Portugal, and Portugal is an EU member. Right? It's an EU member state. So, if they can start producing alternatives to cocoa, in which all of the ingredients can be found in the EU, so they might be using some sort of grain as a substrate, using carob as a flavoring, for example, or as a part of a flavoring, and they can produce everything within the EU. They are no longer subject to, at least for that ingredient, to anything associated with the EUDR. And so they might be able to take a whole lot of risk associated with the EUDR, take a whole lot of the costs associated with the EUDR, and move them off their balance sheet. Now, at the moment, I have yet to taste any alt.cocoa which satisfies me as a chocolate critic, as a chocolate connoisseur, as somebody who eats a lot of chocolate, there's nothing I've tasted so far that replaces a good bar of chocolate, a good bar of single origin chocolate from a specialty, made with specialty beans from a specialty chocolate maker, a small specialty chocolate maker. I've yet to find anything. But that's not the market for alt cocoa. That's not the market for alt chocolate. If I'm a big company, right, and I'm making a chocolate covered candy bar. So I've got nuts and caramel and nougat and something else in the center. And all I've got is a thin coating of a chocolate like substance around the outside. Then going with an alt cocoa / alt chocolate, right? It's, I'm really not, if I'm talking about a candy bar, am I really pushing this as a chocolate and I'm not doing it as a gourmet chocolate product? And so if the consumer can't really notice what the difference is, do they care as long as the price is the same? And the answer is absolutely not. So there is, right, a market for alt cocoa without a doubt, right? And the big companies are going to be pursuing it for a lot of reasons: cost reduction, risk reduction, right? No need for EUDR compliance for this part of their product line, all sorts of things, right? Sugar is not under EUDR compliance. There are no nuts which are subject to EUDR compliance. Why is sugar not subject to EUDR compliance? Because all of the land that's been cleared for sugar production was cleared before the deforestation date, the cutoff date, which is end of December 2020 or 2021, right? There's no new land which is being deforested for sugar production, right? So that's why it's not a regulated product under the EUDR. But alt.cocoa and alt.chocolate are going to continue to be a big thing, right? And one of the places where it's going to be really important, well, I'll get to that, where it's going to be really important. And when I think there's a really, really good place where some of these alt technologies can be really, really beneficial. And we'll get to that very, very closely. But it is the price of cocoa that is driving Big Chocolate and others to accelerate their investment in finding alternatives to cocoa beans. And my personal major um, reason for not being gung ho about this is that Big Chocolate has been taking advantage, right, unfair advantage of cocoa farmers for over 100 years, right? And if you give them an off-road to say, oh, we no longer need to buy cocoa beans, there is no longer any financial incentive. We no longer need to buy cocoa beans because we can create an alternative using ingredients we can source entirely within the EU or entirely within the United States, or we can source them from a country which is not subject to EUDR compliance, right? Then what we can do is we can abandon cocoa farmers, and we don't need to pay anything. We've externalized, right, all of the risk associated with deforestation and underproductive farms and aging farmers. We no longer need to be responsible for fixing the problems that we've solved. And that's one of my primary objections. I think the technology, well, no, it is the primary objection that I have to these alt.cocoa initiatives. Right, is that they should not be used, is these companies should not be given a get out of purgatory. Certainly none of them is going to jail, but a card that allows them to obviate their responsibilities for the issues that they have created in producing countries where cocoa is grown. And again, I'm fascinated by the technology. I think it's really, really interesting. What do you think? I mean, if you have an opinion about alt cocoa and alt chocolate, do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? Am I totally off base with this? Go into the comments and let me know. And if you do it during the live stream, I will get it up on the screen and I will respond to your question or respond to your comment. Happy to do that. With respect to the next item on my list, sustainability, traceability, corporate social responsibility, all of these things are now being driven by the price of cocoa. Anything that has any impact on increasing the price of cocoa is going to be looked at very, very clearly. Now, right, one place where, I didn't add social certification here, but we can add social certification is, if the fair trade, where is the fair trade floor in cocoa? Where is the fair trade premium in cocoa? What is the impact of the increase in cost of cocoa on the futures market? How is that having an effect on the price of the fair trade floor and the fair trade premiums? And from previous reporting, fair trade is recognizing that they're hopelessly out of step with where their regime is in terms of certification and premiums and pricing floors and things like that. And they are going to be updating all of that and releasing information sort of early Q2. Early Q2 in 2026. And when that comes out, I will be talking about how they plan to do this. One of the things I want to focus on is who has been able to provide input into this. The stakeholders that are involved is important. So, for example, if Big Chocolate, right, is at the table helping to determine the fair trade floor and what the fair trade premium is, there's going to be negative downward pricing pressure on things because Big Chocolate wants the lowest possible prices for what they're doing. Now, at the moment, there is research which suggests that only about 1/3 of all of the cocoa that has social certification actually earns the premium that the certifier has promised. So, for example, if I produce 10 metric tons of fair trade certified cocoa, on average, I only sell about 3.5 metric tons of that at the premium price. And so the cost of certification and the cost of all the work and all the labor that is done to pay for and maintain the certification, that 3.5 metric tons needs to pay for the other 65% that doesn't earn the premium. And that's a really, really important factor that I think that most people don't understand. But going forward, right, if the new price of cocoa is going from somewhere, $2,500 to $3,500 a metric ton and is settling into $6,000 to $7,000 a metric ton, again, looking at the futures market, that appears to be where things are going, then anything which is going to have any upward pricing pressure, right, the farm gate price, premiums that are paid, costs associated with certification, anything, licensing fees, all of that is going to be coming under increasing scrutiny. And we're going to see, I believe, over the course of 2026, a bunch of changes, which have been signaled in part by what it is that Fair Trade International, FLO Fair Trade in Bonn, has announced that they're going to be doing. Really, really important. But again, all of these things, right, are related to the price of cocoa, which is one of the reasons why I've got 1A, 1B, and 1 and ... forever. These are all things that are going to come under increasing scrutiny associated with how much does it cost to do these things. The more the cost goes up, there's going to be a non-virtuous circle. The more the price of cocoa stays high, the greater the interest in alt cocoa and alt chocolate among Big Chocolate. If you are a small chocolate maker, right, and I think this is really important, if you are a small chocolate maker, having a position about alternative cocoa that builds upon the narrative that Big Chocolate is an oppressor, it takes unfair advantage, that you are against it because of these reasons, and you double down on your commitment to cocoa farmers. This is why we're doing it. And this is why we use real cocoa, not fake cocoa, in our business, even though it is more expensive, is a really, really good understanding to have and to think about for your 2026 marketing campaign as increasing pressure goes to replace real chocolate with alt chocolate and real cocoa with alt cocoa, having a defined position that says this is what my company stands for, and this is who we're going to support, and this is why we're going to support them and continue to support them, is going to be really, really important. I think is going to be a really, really important narrative, which is going to appeal to people who already believe in the desire to support farmers. So the slow food movement, people who are looking at authentic, you know geographic origins and things like cheese and wine and beer and spirits and things like that. These are the people who are going to respond to those kinds of marketing messages, and these are the people who've already convinced themselves that it's okay to pay more, right? Which is another thing that you want to do. You want to focus your marketing materials, focus your marketing campaigns on people who believe who have the same set of beliefs that you do, who understand that it's not only okay, but it's virtuous to pay a little bit more for what it is they're doing, as long as they understand the how and the why, right? And that's the connection that needs to get made. Why is this happening, right? And what am I doing, and how am I directly benefiting the farmers whose work I am enjoying? Chocolate maker needs to have cocoa beans, right? Flavor of cocoa beans, dependent upon farmers. If we're using specialty cocoa to make specialty chocolate, make that connection, right? And perhaps this is not news to you, right? My guessing is if you're a specialty chocolate maker, it's not news to you. But what I would do is I would think very, very carefully about the language that you use. It, no, and not think very carefully, but sometimes examine and re-examine the language that you're using, right, to make that connection in more poignant ways. Is the point that I want to make as somebody who's been looking at the industry. And so looking ahead to 2026, how am I going to respond to the high price of cocoa, right? This is one way to think about responding to the high price of cocoa, and connecting with others who have that same feeling, and the same messaging that you want to promote. I think is really, really important. So having continued to look at the stories, the not trend stories that are going to continue to be important in 2026, let's take a look at some trends, right? That maybe or maybe you do not want to follow. Before we do that, one more, not related to the price of cocoa, which is why it's two, is a whole bunch of issues related to food safety. Obviously, we have Consumer Reports, who's been talking about heavy metals in chocolate, heavy metals in baby food, heavy metals in protein powders, and things like that, right? We've got a whole bunch of other food safety issues that I think are going to be stories to follow. And this is Food Safety Magazine. They say top 10 food safety scientific studies. They don't qualify what top 10 means in the headline. They're trying to attract your attention, but they do say that these are the most popular, right? So these are the top 10 food safety projects that have captured the attention of our audience in 2025. All right, that are going to go forward. So are they the top 10 scientific studies in food safety? I don't know. They're the most popular. They are the most popular among the readers of Food Safety Magazine. So number one, or number 10, working backwards. So there has been a lot of research about how the type of food that you're consuming has an effect on Listeria's ability to survive digestion and cause sickness, right? And nobody wants a food recall which is related to Listeria. But the findings of the study underscore the role of food composition in pathogen behavior, with smoked fish and soft cheese posing heightened risks compared with other foods. So it's the matrix, the substrate. So where is this an issue? If you are doing any fresh dairy based product, so you're doing ice cream, you're doing a chocolate pudding, you're doing anything which contains fresh dairy with chocolate, you're at heightened risk for a Listeria outbreak, and you need to be careful in your food safety procedures. This should be something that is a duh kind of thing, but there is a link to the study, and you can find out. I don't know anybody that's doing a smoked salmon chocolate product. Now, I can imagine how to make that work, but if you do have a smoked salmon chocolate product and putting them together with a dairy, oh yeah, there could be really interesting ways to do that. You have a Listeria issue, and you need to be aware of what that's going to be. So, food safety issue for 2026. Next one is microplastics increased antibiotic resistance of E. coli and aid biofilm formation. So if you've got a product that's got bioplastics in it, right, and you end up having an E. coli infection, not common in chocolate with properly roasted cocoa beans. it's important to know if you have properly roasted cocoa beans, you're not going to have much of a problem associated with E. coli contamination. But if there is a product that your consumer, right, is also eating, which contains high quantities of microplastics, then there is an increased risk of antibiotic resistant E. coli, which is a challenge. I mean, we just need to be aware of that just in terms of healthy. But resistance was observed across all tested antibiotics, right? Ampicillin, ciprofloxacin, doxycycline, streptomycin, right? With polystyrene microplastic showing the greatest effects. What you might want to do if you're using polystyrene foam, for example, in your shipping regimen to keep things cold, you might want to stay away from it, because if you're unpacking it, you run the risk of small amounts of microplastics, right, being inhaled, attaching to surfaces, getting in your hands, and eventually into your nose and mouth. You want to be very, very careful about that. But microplastics, if I have to think of a food safety issue, microplastics come up all the time in terms of this study. Now, there's another one that I want to talk about, which is I want to go back to. I want to highlight, which is with respect to microplastics, is that there's a study which shows that chewing gum releases thousands of microplastics, whether government is synthetic or natural. And I think that what is being said here, that is the point to take away from this, is that the definition, what we think of as microplastics, and what researchers think of as microplastics are probably not identical. That we think of microplastics as things which are necessarily petroleum derived, and that may not be the case. I'm trying to think of what the source of the microplastics might be in chewing gum, right? And if you're interested in knowing about it, there's a link to the study. Where this might affect you is that there is another study that shows that tea bags release millions of microplastics when brewed. Now, this is especially true if you're using a nylon or polypropylene tea bag, but it also shows up in cellulose paper, right? Tea bags as well. So you may want to think about microplastics and where sources of microplastics might show up in terms of your production, because if these things can have microplastics in them, chewing gum and tea bags can have microplastics in them, maybe your chocolate does as well. And then finally, for this, finally, there are two other stories, one of which says aging raw milk and cheese does not inactivate avian flu, but low pH helps. So you may not be using a raw cheese, you may not be using any fermented dairy product in your chocolate. Some people do, like a chocolate chip parmesan, right? Which might be made from raw milk from Italy. Does not inactivate avian flu. Just another thing to consider for people, right, who live in a country, the United States, where the health authorities are saying flu vaccines. Who needs flu vaccines? Right? So there is a need for perhaps extra care there. But this notion of vaccines and inactivation of pathogens is going to be an increasing story over the course of the next several years, driven by changes in health policy here in the United States. But low pH does. So you want to make things which are slightly acidic. So 6.6, 7.0 is where the difference is, where the acidity to basicity, acid alkaline is changed. So at a pH of 5 and below, then avian flu is inactivated. What does that mean? If you're using some sort of dairy product, you want to make sure that the pH of your final product is 5 or below, just to make sure you're not worried about it. And then finally, there's some suggestion in the EU, so not important so much here in the United States yet, but the EU has suggested, that there are experts who are recommending to the EU that more allergens be added to the mandatory labeling. If it happens in the EU, then chances are there will be a knock-on here in the US, because you don't want to have two sets of allergen regulations, one for products which are only available in the US and ones which are only available in the EU. It's one of the reasons why companies like Cadbury have, Hershey manufacture their product under license here in the United States. They have one set of regimens in the EU, and then they have another set of regimen in the US. And it's not like they're exporting products which might be more expensive from the EU, or exporting products which might not be up to regulatory compliance from the US to the EU. So it's important to understand. But based on severity, recurrence, and the hidden presence in foods, the study recommends adding goat and sheep milk to a list of allergens, buckwheat, right, peas and lentils, and pine nuts to the EU list of major allergens. So, I don't necessarily know that I'm going to see a whole lot of chocolate. Well, no. So pea protein powder. So, okay, it's an allergen. What if you were doing a protein enhanced chocolate bar with pea powder? Now you have to list the peas as an allergen. Buckwheat is not something that I find a lot in chocolate, but I could imagine its use in a number of places. Goat and sheep milk. I think there are a lot of people who are looking at goat milk chocolate as an alternative, goat milk as an alternative to cow's milk as a low risk dairy product. And so if it gets added in the EU, we might find that goat milk is going to have to be listed as an allergen. And pine nuts. I mean, I love pine nuts. I think that there's a real opportunity to do some really interesting pine nut related products. In Arizona, they grow pine, which is where I am. They grow pine nuts. That's a cool thing. But interesting to know. Keep on top of this because we may find that labeling legislation here in the United States, right? There are also a couple of things. Kiwi, beehive products, honey as an allergen, right? And apples as an allergen, right? Wow, right? These are some really interesting sources of food-induced anaphylaxis, right? So let's go. These are going to become really important. So there's you won't have a highlighted list. I only see these highlights in my browser, but if you click on food safety here, you'll find the link to this page, right? Some other trends. In the last third of the program. The list. So what I did was I went and gathered a whole bunch of different lists about trends in 2026. And what I did is I synthesized them. I looked for commonalities and differences across the list to see where they agreed and where they differed. So these lists tend to be outlet centric, right, and also industry centric. So, for example, if I'm looking at the dairy industry, there's one set of trends. If I'm looking at the confectionery industry, there's another set of trends. If I'm looking at beverage industry, there's another set of trends. So I tried to focus on chocolate and confectionery. And chocolate confectionery, although candy, sugar confectionery is in that list. But overall, right, despite that outlet centricity, trend reports tend to focus on wellness, right, which focuses on plant-based functional ingredients like adaptogens and botanicals. Right? Sensory experiences like rich textures, bold global flavors, and nostalgia. I think that's a lovely idea. So you take a nostalgic idea and you put a modern twist that pays homage, right, and reminds people of perhaps a childhood favorite or is an interesting trend for next year. And purposeful indulgence. So purposeful, right, is really interesting. Is about traceability, sustainable packaging. Mini formats for portion control. So again, if you're thinking about what the trend reports are talking about for 2026, this seems to be the synthesis. If you go across a bunch of different reports, this is what they're talking about. So number one, we're all talking about, what about Dubai chocolate? Is Dubai chocolate going to, right, continue as a thing? And so the answer to that question appears to be yes. We talked about this before, which is Hershey's did a Dubai-inspired chocolate bar, but they did an LTO. 10,000 will be available for purchase worldwide. And so the LTO is a really important aspect of this limited time offer. Artificial scarcity, it is artificial scarcity, right, which contributed to the original viral spread of the Dubai chocolate, which is pistachio, tahini, and knafe, which is a form of um, oh my gosh, what's the in baklava? My brain has gotten is crazy at the moment, but you get the idea. So Hershey's is doing this, and apparently, even though I thought it was a really awful product, right, as an awful representative of Dubai, apparently, um, um, our friends at Lindt have had a global smash hit with their Dubai chocolate bar. I tasted it for the first time at an event that I did during the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival in Rushville last month, and I thought that everything that the Dubai chocolate bar was supposed to be in terms of delivering um, rich textures and bold global flavors was entirely missing from the Lindt version of the bar. There was nothing about it that I liked. But, right, what it says is if you combine the notion of the Dubai chocolate bar with this notion of rich textures and bold global flavors, right, all right, perhaps connecting into nostalgia as they talk about it, you have a a roadmap, especially with a limited edition or limited time offer of producing an interesting product for 2026. So could I take, right? So I live in the United States. Could I take pecans or could I take uh, hazelnuts, filberts, which are produced in the United States, and try to do something like a Dubai style, which is a Dubai inspired product using American ingredients? And what would I use for the crunchy element that was uniquely American, right? That would be an interesting thing. I'm not going to use phyllo dough, which is what I was thinking about, but could I use some other product which is really well known? And I can think of two or three of them right now, which I could use to create a very American version of Dubai chocolate and brand it. So think about that as a trend. Will Dubai style continue to dominate? It's hard to know. Pistachios and tahini. Um, Sesame seeds are often considered to be an allergen by some. So, can I create something which doesn't have that allergen component? Might be something to consider as well. Um, so that would be number one. And the importance of understanding artificial scarcity and the limited time offer, I think, is going to be key to doing this. Right, the original fixed chocolate bar, they only had a certain number of these that they made every day, right? And they started in the morning, and when they sold out, you couldn't get any more until you came back the next day. It is the success of the original Cronut in New York, produced by Dominica and Cell. They only made 100 or something like that every day, and if you didn't start lining up at 7 o'clock, they would be gone by 9:15, and you had to come back the next day. Do not underestimate the power of the artificial scarcity and the limited time offer. Really, really important marketing messages to take advantage of. Another thing that we're looking at is the notion of functionality. I did mention a news report which has come up recently that says that theobromine has been linked to uh, um, extending life outcome in model animals. So they haven't done in vivo tests in humans yet, but they have done in vivo tests in model animals, which suggests that consuming theobromine will extend a person's life, whatever that means, right? So people are interested in life extension research. We're going to start seeing that. Is it a trend that you want to follow? Is it a trend that anyone wants to follow? No, but there's a lot of interest in life extension research. And I think what we'll do is we'll start seeing theobromine supplements, whether they're in chocolate or they're separate, um, being marketed. It's quite bitter, as a matter of fact. So bitter like caffeine. If you've ever had a straight caffeine pill, theobromine is bitter like that. So you need to be very careful. Um, Collagen as a collagen in chocolate, I wouldn't. We see collagen showing up all over the place. Improve nails, improve hair, improve bone density, all sorts of things. collagen in chocolate, why not? Depending upon the form of collagen, where the collagen comes from, it should have an impact on texture. And we may see that collagen not only has a dietary benefit, but there could be other benefits in terms of production of chocolate as an emulsifier, or as something which modifies the texture of chocolate. So that's something to consider when it comes there. Protein, protein, we talked about pea protein. Peas may be a new allergen, so maybe not. One of the highest sources of protein is pea protein. And there is, according to Consumer Reports, we have to worry about heavy metals contamination in pea protein. Are there forms of fiber? So IMO, inulin, as ways of improving the fiber content of what you're producing, of what you're consuming, for dietary health benefit. We're going to see functionality as a continuing trend in 2026. There are going to be more chocolate products which are making health benefit claims. I mean, explicit health benefit claims in the next, well, not only in 2026, but in the foreseeable future. Number one, tech. So we talked about this a little bit earlier when it comes to replacements for when it comes to alt cocoa and alt chocolate. So there is a new report on replacements for palm oil, right? And palm oil is palm oil fractions, especially palm kernel oil fractions, are used as a replacement for cocoa butter in compound chocolates, and it is used as a replacement for cocoa butter in chocolate flavored products, which are based on cocoa, right? And so one of the things that I think is really, really interesting to look at, there's going to be research and development to be done but plant-based and CO2 derived fats, right? They're one of the interesting areas that I think is really going to be important is there's a company here in the US called Celeste Bio. There's a company in Edinburgh, so in Scotland, there's making a product called Palm Alt, and Palm Alt is made using a plant-based blend of rapeseed oil, fibers, and proteins. But the goal here, especially with another company called Nobel Group, right, using CO2. So they're using CO2 synthesis. Is that precision fermentation? They're synthesizing using carbon dioxide. They've developed a CO2-based ingredient that could replace palm oil in cosmetics. Now, if they can do that, they can also create a synthesis of cocoa butter, a nature identical cocoa butter. And this is where Celeste Bio has done most of its work. If we can create a cocoa butter replacement for non-food applications, I think that's really, really interesting. So what would happen to the demand for cocoa, the price for cocoa, in terms of underproduction? So what would happen if we no longer needed to take as much of the cocoa beans as we did and use it just for cocoa butter production for cosmetics and topical applications rather than for food-based applications? I think that there's a really good case to be made that would be a really, really interesting application for the synthesis of cocoa butter replacements. And if it can be done for palm, it can be done for cocoa butter. So that's one thing to consider when it comes to new replacements. Now, grass, right, generally recognized as safe. These are products which, if they were fermented, would be easy to get GRAS certification. This notion of producing a product which you're going to consume using a novel method like CO2 synthesis would require years of study before it gained acceptance by the FDA here in the United States as a product that could be put in food. So one way to speed the acceptance into the marketplace for CO synthesized fat replacements would be to focus on their use as replacements for cocoa butter in non-food items. That would be an interesting way to think about it. Do you need to follow it? No, right? Is it interesting? Technically, yes. Could it have an impact on the price of cocoa butter? Perhaps, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think it's something that should be followed. It's not necessarily a news story, but a big news story that's going to dominate. But it is, in fact, the price of cocoa is a contributor to all of these things. So there was a study published. I believe I talked about this a while ago in talking about fermentation. So a defined microbial community reproduces attributes of fine flavor fermentation. So this is a study that was done in Colombia using specific varieties of cocoa in Santander. And what they found is that by being able to develop a tailored inoculant of specific varieties of yeast and bacteria, that they were able to control the flavor of the chocolate which came from the cocoa beans, and that many of the flavors that came out of that chocolate were ones that are identified with fine and flavor cocoa. So not straight chocolate flavor, but fruit and flowers and things like that, right? And that's interesting. Interesting at a technical level. And for me, it models what it is that I learned working with Ingemann down in Nicaragua in 2014. Yeah, although they were focusing on understanding the natural microbiome, and then by changing the way they fermented, so times and temperatures and things like that, by an understanding of what the microbiome was, what the pH was, what the sugar quantity was, all these sorts of things. What they could do is they could direct the cocoa fermentation to produce a specific flavor in the chocolate, right? And to the point where they could take a single genetic variety and produce 6 or 7 or more different flavor profiles just by changing the parameters of fermentation. So this is not necessarily new stuff. What is new is they've been able to develop a tailored inoculant. They understand, right, which varieties are dominant in the environment, and by changing which varieties are present in the tailored inoculant and the ratios of these varieties, what they can do is they can control the flavor. Where I have a problem with this, and so I don't necessarily know that this is a trend to follow, what I take from this is that it's why are academic researchers who don't necessarily have market understanding talking about how much the uptake of fine and flavor cocoa is in the market. So there is only so much room for fine and flavor cocoa, which demands a premium. And everybody wants to move farmers from commodity cocoa to fine and flavor cocoa. And the market is only going to buy so much fine and flavor cocoa. If big chocolate, right, is focused on, oh, I need cocoa which produces a chocolate I already know how to make, right, and I'm really, really focused on, the variety of West African that, a Melanato Forastero, which has a very, very specific flavor profile, especially in Ghana, which is focused on that, then they're not going to be replacing that with higher cost varieties which produce new flavors, right? So this might make sense in the specialty market, maybe, but the question is, who's going to pay for the inoculants? If you've got farmers, right, and central fermentaries and processors who are using the natural microbiome, who's going to pay for a tailored inoculant? And are there any IP issues associated with it? When we talk about maybe big pharma or big companies are saying, well, what happens if I were to have inoculant in a pile and to take some and I were to propagate it myself? Can I do that? The answer is probably not. And so, there are a whole sorts of economic issues, intellectual property issues, other issues, which are associated with it. It's nice to know that we can produce tailored cultures which will deliver specific flavor profiles, but what are the market economics which might make it so that somebody other than an estate holder, right, who is an estate holder, not the average farmer, is going to be able to afford the cultures to do the work. So is it a trend you need to follow? It is, if you're in the cocoa business, in the chocolate business, being aware of new research and fermentation is going to be important. And so that's actually going to be the topic for the next episode of Pod Save Chocolate. So this coming Friday, January 2nd, the first episode of Pod Safe Chocolate in 2026 is going to look at fermentation research. New fermentation research published in 2025. I'm going to bring up the study that I just showed you, and then other fermentation research and replacement with quality. And I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into this multimodal hyperspectral data set of cocoa beans with physiochemical annotation. What does this mean? So hyperspectral imaging is a way of looking at taking a photograph of something, not just using visible light, using infrared, near infrared, and other wavelengths of light to be able to take a picture of something. And if you can connect that with a chemical analysis of the cocoa bean, what you can do is you can then take a picture of a cocoa bean and relatively quickly be able to understand what its chemical properties are. And that's really, really interesting. So I want to be able to go and take a quick picture and be able to look at, among other things, the distribution of fermentation. I'm going to get into this more on Friday, but this is a bit of research. It was published this year, 2025, which I think has got some, actually at the end of November, in Scientific Data, which is part of Nature, which deserves a whole lot of careful paying attention. Now, they've done this with one set, I believe. They've done it multi-industry, although the focus, I believe, is in Colombia. And so it's worth reading if you ever run a cut test. If you ever do a cut test, you want to look at this and think about what it might mean if you could have a relatively inexpensive, sensor, which you could attach to your phone or to some other camera, take a picture, right, through the sensor of a cocoa bean and understand a lot about its chemical makeup. This is where this is going, by the way. And you'd be able to understand quality, and you'd be able to understand maybe free fatty acid, moisture, all sorts of other kinds of things, which is revealed in hyperspectral imaging. It's really, really cool. And it's a technology that I think that I've been looking at since 2018. 2026 is going to be a big year for mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, where things are going to get really crazy mad, M-A-D, here, not just M&A. So Mars and Kellanova, their merger was approved here in the United States. They're two U.S.-based companies, so Kellanova's Kellogg's, and we're going to see how the impact of this acquisition, as the two companies, combine their operations, what that's going to do for their respective portfolios, and how sourcing relationships might change. So if Mars can bring a much, much stronger sourcing relationship to a Kellanova product, what does that mean for the sourcing relationships, and vice versa, and products? I mean, to what extent do the Mars and Kellanova product lines complement each other and or compete with each other? The other thing this does is I'd have to go look at Mars Kellanova, and I'll go take a look at that and find out, is the combined Mars Kellanova, how do they compare with Mondelez in terms of annual sales? Pretty close. I don't know that the merger dethrones Mondelez, but we got big market power, and what that means is, even though it survived antitrust scrutiny, I don't know what that means, right? And acquisitions. This one's for 2025. So Ritter, German-based Ritter, purchased Chocolove, and maybe you'll like or are aware of the Chocolove brand for their branding. Chocolove is a 100% berry calabat at the moment product. Ritter manufactures some of their own chocolate, so it'll be interesting to see how Ritter USA, right, has an effect. Chocolove is now part of the Ritter USA portfolio. I should say that. And so, how does this affect the Chocolove brand, branding, marketing, distribution, all of those kinds of things, new product development, all those sorts of things are going to come on. All right, divestitures. We talked a little bit about this in the last episode. Barry Callebaut appears to be getting ready to split off its cocoa sourcing activities into some sort of either subsidiary, or partially owned, wholly owned, or into a separate operating company. If it's going to be a separate operating company, or somebody buys it, who is that going to be? We've seen a lot of mergers. So the Mars Kellanova merger is the opposite of the divestiture of Callebaut. This acquisition which is different from a merger technically. But this notion of there have been huge changes in the landscape of who the people of the companies that are in the big chocolate umbrella, the top 100 companies. And so it's going to be 2026 is going to see more of this activity, and maybe accelerated activity is my thought. There's a lot of work that's being done to reformulate all sorts of products for GLP-1 compatibility. GLP-1 changes if you're in an active course of treatment with GLP-1. It can change your ability to taste things in particular ways. And so if so big companies are adjusting some formulations so that people who are on GLP-1 drugs will be able to have good gustatory experiences in the process of gustatory experiences consuming these products. And so as more and more people taking these weight loss products, as there are more and more of them, more and more products are going to be reformulated to respond to changing taste buds. What does this mean for you? If you have a friend or a family member or a group of people who are on these GLP-1 drugs, you might want to set up a little tasting panel and find out how their taste has changed, right? They may like them, they may like them less. It could be something just to be aware of, right? So that's something to consider. And then finally, I want to talk about the general nature of innovation in industrial confectionery. So this is from Confectionery News. It's from the 17th of December. What's hot in confectionery? New product development, right? So Oreo. So it looks like this is cookie dough flavor cream. The only thing that strikes Oreo to me, again, it's a limited edition, so limited time offer. That's pretty interesting. But if I were to see this and I didn't see the little Nabisco Oreo logo on the top of this, I would not think Oreo at all, right? So Oreo is stepping outside the traditional format in doing something. Is that innovation? I don't know that it's innovation. It's a product risk. It's a product risk the same way that Godiva made a huge risk when it introduced its G line in the mid 2010s. So they hired an American confectioner, Norman Love. They used a Swiss chocolate from Felklin, and they abandoned the gold ballot. I mean, it completely changed the branding. So they use American forward flavors, things like apple pie, which you would never find from a quote unquote Belgian chocolate maker. And so they're doing interesting things with the branding. But if I were to see these, it would never occur to me that this was an Oreo product from across the room. So that's one thing. Cakesters is another thing. There's nothing about this that says to me Oreo, right? And it doesn't look like this is a limited time offer. This is like a new product. And Oreo Cakesters, I mean, if I want an Oreo, I'm going to get an Oreo. There's nothing about the Oreo brand, right, that way that strikes me. So if you're going to be doing innovation think about your branding, right? Again, small chocolate makers. If it weren't for the fact that, Oreos is in almost every grocery store in the country anyway, and Nabisco is a large enough company that what they can do is they can buy shelf space. I mean, soft bake, this says the only thing that says Oreo here is the cream filling, and there are lots of cookies and crackers that have cream fillings. But is it innovation? Is the question. That is it. Is this innovative? A line extension, certainly. Is it innovation? I don't know. I would say no. So there's a UK company, I believe it's a UK company called Grenade. They've got a cream egg, which makes me think of Cadbury. I don't think it's a Cadbury. I don't necessarily know. Is it a Cadbury company? It doesn't say that it is. But what we've got is we have a protein bar, which has got a cream egg filling. Is it innovation? I mean, it's a filled protein bar. Maybe, maybe not. I am not the target market for this, right? Are you the target market for this, right? If you know, would you walk in and you hate your protein bar? Some again limited edition, which might speak to it. So by calling it a limited edition and a limited time offer, they might get people to try it before it went away. And if sales were good enough, what they do is they might make it a permanent product, but it's going to be available for 4 months. So cream egg soft core, I don't necessarily know soft core. So soft core protein. I can think of some. I can think of some soft core protein, and it's not a chocolate bar. Sorry about that. So Chocolove Holiday Bites. So this is a new form factor and a new. They already do raspberry flavored things. So it's raspberries in chocolate. Is it innovation? I don't know where it's innovation. Maybe because of its shape. So alongside the seasonal launch, shoppers can find their raspberries and dark chocolate, which combines freeze-dried raspberry pieces with smooth Belgian dark chocolate. All right. So I don't know why this is innovative, right? Freeze-dried raspberries, freeze-dried fruit and chocolate is not new at all in any respect. Godiva, right? Cravey Chalky Dodos. Not entirely certain I like the name of that. But free from snack brand Crave is extending its frozen bakery range with the launch of gluten and dairy-free donuts, Chalky Dodos. Chalky Dodos, I do not like that name. Chalky Dodos can be defrosted quickly for a fresh, fluffy texture, helping to reduce food waste compared to traditional donuts. I'm just trying to figure out what sort of food science, right, is behind taking a freshly cooked donut. What's going on in the dough, right? What has been added to the dough, right? That enables it to be frozen and then defrosted, right? And have something which, right, delivers a fresh, fluffy texture, right? I don't know about you, but if I'm going to go and have a donut, I'm going to go out and have a donut, right? I'm not going to go in and pull a donut out of the refrigerator. And lastly, because we're at the end of trends for 2026, I just wanted to give you a quick look into my creative process. So when thinking about this, you'll notice that for the 2025, if you go back and look at last Friday's episode, you'll see that I did a rear view mirror from a car, right? And this one, I decided to look at a coin-operated set of binoculars. So looking backwards and looking forwards, that's the sort of the metaphor that I'm working with here. But on the left here, you see the original photo. And what I did on the right, you'll see that there's a crop. So I cropped to be able to change the emphasis on the coin-operated binoculars. I flipped it because if you go take a look at the type that's here, PodSaveChocolate, if I didn't flip it, the coin-operated binocular would be hidden by the text. So I flopped it, right? And then what I did is I used some masking in a program. And what I did is I only altered the colors in the now upper right of the sky. So there is a slight increase in the left here. I took the mask and brought it over, but I wanted to emphasize the colors on the right-hand side. So I used Photoshop for the cropping and the flipping, and then I used a program called Luminar Neo to do the masking and the changing of colors in the sky in order to be able to, what I want to do is balance the colors in the sky with the text of the banner. And with that, we're done for this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. This is the homepage of Pod Save Chocolate, of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. And if you're not a member, this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like all episodes, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. You can go there, click on the green button in the top. I'm logged in, so it says account. You can go there. It'll say join. There's always a free membership tier that has been since 2008 when I founded the Chocolate Life. But if you do have the financial resources to support the Chocolate Life, beginning as little as $5 a month, then your support of the Chocolate Life in 2025 and in 2026 will help keep Pod Save Chocolate on the air. And with that, I want to say thanks, everybody, for being here with me today. I hope that everybody has a fabulous New Year's Eve. Tomorrow night, we have a boot drop Here in Prescott, we don't have a ball drop. They do it twice. One's at 10 o'clock, which coincides with midnight on the East Coast, and then they do one at midnight local time. So we'll do a boot drop downtown around the courthouse. If it's not raining, unfortunately, there's rain on the forecast tomorrow night. If it's not raining, that's where you'll find me tomorrow evening. I hope you've got plans, whatever those plans are. Make it safe. Make it safe. I hope that involves friends and family, and maybe it involves some chocolate. I know that I'm going to have some chocolate with my adult beverage celebration tomorrow night. And with that, everybody, remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, ciao.